So we've broken the afternoon into a couple of themes. The first theme is the Stanford participation in the larger consortium. As I'm sure you're aware, research doesn't happen in a vacuum, and research efforts at a single institution can have limitations. Priya just mentioned the importance of the American Family cohort, for example. Stanford is wonderful, but we may have limited resources. Our patient population might not be broadly representative, and there's a number of other reasons. So the speakers who are joining us in the first session this afternoon will be discussing their work either with the Odyssey Consortium or involving network or multi-site research efforts. So first up, our first talk is going to be given by Allison Callahan and Stephanie Leonard. By means of introduction, Dr. Allison Callahan is an instructor in the Center for Biomedical Informatics and a clinical data scientist in the Stanford Healthcare Data Science team led by Nigam Shah. Her current research uses informatics to expand and improve the data available about pregnancy and birth, and to develop and maintain an EHR-derived obstetric database. Dr. Stephanie Leonard is an assistant professor in the Dunleavy Maternal Fetal Medicine Center and is a faculty member of the California Maternal Quality Care Collaborative, CMQCC for short. Still kind of long, but it's for short, and the Maternal and Child Health Research Institute, MCHRI. The overall goal of her research is to advance equitable, positive health experiences and outcomes for pregnant individuals. Allison and Stephanie are going to speak to us today about their experiences and accomplishments of leading the Odyssey Perinatal and Reproductive Health Group. With that, over to you, Allison and Stephanie.
Great, thank you so much. I've shared my screen. Hopefully you can see a slide. I'm super happy to co-present today with Stephanie, whose work I actually became aware of at the first STARR user group meeting 2 years ago. And so I am very thankful to the existence of this meeting, because that is how I got connected to Stephanie, and we are continuing to collaborate 2 years later. And it's what we're here to talk to you about today, which is our work in the last year or so to co-lead the Odyssey Perinatal and Reproductive Health Group, or PREG. I owe all credit to Stephanie for the PREG name. It has stuck and people seem to like it. And so we're going to talk about sort of how that got started, but also use this time to get to tell you a little bit about some of the interesting research projects that we're doing as part of this group. So this is who we are. We have a third co-leader, Louisa Smith, who is brought in by Stephanie as well, and she's an assistant professor in the Department of Health Sciences at Northeastern University's Roux Institute, which is a major center for Odyssey related methods development and research projects. And so Louisa is the third person that we're representing here in our conversations about PREG. So we're going to trade back and forth, Stephanie and me, as we go through this talk. And in the first part, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the PREG group and how we got started. Stephanie will continue that, and then we'll go into some specific research that we're doing as part of this group. So the PREG group in Odyssey, we are about 30 people who span Europe and the United States, specifically Norway, Spain, and the US. And we focused from the beginning in creating this group to include a diversity of institutions. The Odyssey network, if people have not participated much in it, is a really big and diverse group of research institutions and health systems and industry partners. And so when we created the PREG group, we wanted to include a representation of all of those groups in this specific area, which is focused on pregnancy and perinatal health research. We also wanted to make sure that we could represent a diversity of roles within those institutions, and we're excited that we have researchers with expertise in informatics, epidemiology, and obstetrics in this group, practicing clinicians, and also epidemiologists, biostatisticians. Stephanie and I are part of the first and third groups, and so we also have MD colleagues as well. The purpose and goals of the PREG group, and I share this because if this seems interesting to you, please reach out to us about joining our meetings. Our purpose is to develop tools and standards for pregnancy and reproductive health research, to foster collaborative studies within the Odyssey network, and also to advance research in this field generally. We had observed that within Odyssey, there were people doing related research in this space, but didn't have necessarily a place that they could come and talk with other people who were doing that work as well. And so we wanted to bring those people together and really as a group move the tool development and standards development for data representation forward to improve the quality of research that we can do in this very important space, which one way or another touches all of us. Pregnancy and birth, either as parents and or as children, touches all of us. And so it's a really important area to focus on, and something that I think we can do a lot with and bring a lot to within the STARR community and within Odyssey as well. The goals that we have as a group, and we just don't create, were created this year, are twofold. And Stephanie will come back to this in more detail later, but twofold: to improve the capture and representation of pregnancy and reproductive health data in the OMOP CDM and in STARR OMOP specifically here at Stanford, and also to create within Odyssey a data network of partners who are interested in doing pregnancy and reproductive health research. And specifically, one of our aims this year is to pilot a network study with at least 5 institutions, focusing in our initial work on a study of the treatment of hypertension in pregnancy. And Stephanie will also talk more about that in a little bit. I couldn't not include this sort of jokey title of how Preg was born. So this was sort of a 2-year process. I initially presented at the Women of Odyssey meeting in April of 2021 on my ideas for this research topic. And I knew that there were other people who were working in this space. And so I had the opportunity to talk to some of them. And at the same time, or around the same time, Louisa and Stephanie were also initiating collaborations within the Odyssey community by attending the symposium and talking to other researchers who are also doing work in this space. We continued to build interest at the Odyssey Symposium in October of 2022. Louisa attended. And then we presented as a team at the Odyssey Community Call, which is that big weekly Odyssey call in November of 2022, to say, hey, we're creating this group, this Preg research group, and we would love if you could join us. And we got a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, and we held our first meeting in December of this past year. And then we developed a series of objectives and key results to guide our work going forward as this group of about 30 researchers. And we presented those to the community in Feb 2023. So it's formally been only a few months that we've existed, but the impetus started about 2 years ago. And at Stanford, Stephanie and I have been working together about 1.5 years, 2 years. I'm going to hand it off to Stephanie to keep talking more about what we do in the Preg group.
Thank you, Allison. It's great to be here again today. So we thought that it would be useful maybe to folks who are interested in starting their own groups, or if they're curious in joining our group, what's it like, how we orchestrated it. We've tried to make it a very engaging initiative with, like, as Allison was emphasizing, lots of different disciplines, lots of different locations, like finding a time of day that works for most people. A lot of that has been, a lot of the work to get this going. Each month we have an open Teams meeting that's through the Odyssey network, I suppose. And each of those focuses either on planning or future work, such in the screenshot is when we were discussing and making our objectives and key results together, and or we do deep dives on specific projects, which I'm going to talk about after this. And these are open to anyone who wants to join. And then in addition to that, each week we have a leadership meeting. So Louisa, Allison, and I meet, and we plan the monthly meetings and the projects as well to keep things moving at a reasonable pace. All right, next slide. Okay. So here are some of the active projects of different group members. One is best practices for representing pregnancy and reproductive health data in the OMOP Common Data Model. And I just want to emphasize here too, yeah, no, you can go to the next one. Sorry. No, I'll just read through them. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll stay there. So developing and evaluating an algorithm to link parents and infants and claims data. And I just wanted to pause here because I think it was interesting what Priya alluded to earlier. Something that's really interesting about pregnancy is, one, it's the #1 reason people are hospitalized in the world. And two, there's 2 different people involved, as well as 2 different medical records. And at Stanford, those are in 2 different systems. And so there's a lot of unique and interesting challenges when we want to be, in most questions, we're interested in both the health of the person who's giving birth as well as the infant or fetus. So a lot of the work that we're interested in is around that and how we can make Odyssey and OMOP data work for those questions and needs. And then additionally, we have team members working on developing, well, it's based at Stanford, a distributed data network of pregnancy data using electronic health records, which Allison will describe more shortly. And as we mentioned, a pilot network study about optimizing treatment of chronic hypertension in pregnancy using a national distributed data network. Accomplishments so far, as Allison mentioned, we haven't been in existence all that long, but so we've had 5 monthly meetings and we have 10 to 20 participants per call with a total of membership around 30. We've been able to foster collaborations between Odyssey work groups. We've hosted a few different Odyssey work groups within our team to help them come up with ideas and create partnerships, as well as between members of our group. We've led by Allison, we've created a pregnancy and birth database with STARR OMOP, and we've used that to identify a low-risk birth cohort. And as a preliminary proof of concept results for a network study from 3 sites, which we'll show you. And additionally, we've had 2 grant proposals submitted, one internally here at Stanford and one to NIH.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about STARR OMOP specific work that we've been able to do in this group and as enabled by the existence of STARR data and the team who maintain it. So we developed obstetric data extractors to create a pregnancy and birth database that sits on top of STARR OMOP. We know that there is a lot of information about, so patients who deliver at Stanford, we know that there is structured data available about those encounters in STARR OMOP. We also know that there's a lot of really valuable information specific to pregnancy and birth in unstructured data and flow sheets that are hard to access as a researcher or as a MD who might be interested in understanding some of the trends in data about pregnancy and birth here at Stanford. And so I, in collaboration with Stephanie and another clinical colleague, developed a series of data extractors to operate over STARR OMOP to get at some of that data. And so if we think about the patient timeline, we took sort of a time point out perspective, and we started by identifying births using structured data and diagnosis codes. And then we built windows out around those events to pull the relevant unstructured note data and progress notes and L&D delivery notes. And then also flow sheet data about the pregnancy that led to that delivery in a larger time window to extract information like how many babies are relevant in that pregnancy, what was their presentation at delivery. And then we developed these extractors to basically pull specific patterns of data from these unstructured sources and complement the structured data that were available. We also did a manual chart review of 100 patient records from 2017 and 2019 in order to determine how well those extractors performed. We specifically measured precision and recall, and we were pretty satisfied with our ability to extract gravidity. So that is, pregnancy history, parity, number of pregnancies, gestational age, plurality and presentation, amongst other variables in the STARR OMOP data. And then we were able to use that information to, so we populated this database for all of those records for all pregnancies or deliveries at Stanford. And then within the subset of those patients who we identified a low risk birth cohort, which is really interesting as a study set for looking at things like outcomes, because we expect certain rates of interventions and outcomes in this low risk birth cohort compared to, say, a higher risk group. And specifically, we identified nulliparous term singleton vertex births using PREG database and STARR OMOP data, and have that available to do a study going forward as part of the Odyssey network. Stephanie also now will talk about our pilot network study that we're doing alongside this.
Yeah, so building off of that work that's also still ongoing, we began a pilot network study focused on antihypertensive medication use for the treatment of chronic hypertension in pregnancy. And the motivation for this was that chronic hypertension affects about 85,000 pregnant people each year in the US, as well as many more worldwide. And it's a major driver of adverse birth outcomes and disparities in those outcomes, both for the pregnant person and the infant. This chart here, sorry, just to go back quick. No, just to show that, so chronic hypertension, which is largely primary hypertension, this is only to 2008 in the US. It's continued to rise among people who are pregnant and above 2%. Okay, next slide. And another major motivation is that hypertension disproportionately affects pregnant people who are Black. Many people are now probably aware, due to some wonderful press coverage and litigation and stuff that and the policymaking, that people who are Black have much higher rates of pregnancy complications, including death and severe morbidities. And chronic hypertension is an underlying cause of a lot of these severe morbidities. And so therefore, there's a lot of the disparities in care and treatment and management of chronic hypertension could have influence on these disparities in outcomes. Next slide. And then another interesting, the moment happened last year when there was a landmark trial was published in England Journal of Medicine showing that treatment of chronic hypertension in pregnancy at lower blood pressure thresholds had benefits for the birthing person and infant. And these results were so compelling that all the major national obstetrical societies immediately revised all their recommendations and now recommend treatment of hypertension at a lower blood pressure in pregnancy. But the study, which is called CHAP, was really well done and had a number of limitations just by the fact of being a randomized controlled trial. So they were only able to include pregnant people who had chronic hypertension and had no high-risk comorbidities. And to be pragmatic, they only randomized them to treatment or no treatment. The type of regimen was left to the discretion of the physician and patient. And this raised a lot of questions that our work is aiming to hopefully address by leveraging EHR across multiple sites in the Odyssey network. The first being what is the most effective and safe antihypertensive medication, given there are many that are available and safe in pregnancy. Second, what is the most effective and safe timing of initiation and dose for each of those medications? And then third, what is the effectiveness and safety among people who have high-risk comorbidities? And I just also want to mention that this is also dovetailing with an effort from other Odyssey researchers to build a distributed data model for hypertension treatment research in non-pregnant adults, I think, or just general adult population. This was published in The Lancet a few years ago, and we really used it as a model for our work among people who are pregnant, in which very different antihypertensive drugs are used due to concerns about fetal safety. And then here's quickly some preliminary data that we have from Stanford, Columbia, and Maine Health, which is our partnership with Louisa Smith at Northeastern. And these are the most common antihypertensive medications that were prescribed in pregnancy based on their EHR and the Odyssey Common Data Model. And so led by Allison, we were able to develop this process to extract these data, which were then run at these two other sites and have been really reassuring and exciting for us to see that, as you can see here, we expected that labetalol and nifedipine are the most commonly used, as well as some others are also widely used, but there is variation in how much they are used. And so there is a need to better understand effectiveness and safety of these.
Great.
Great. And then I'll just quickly say, these are our EHR collaborating sites that have joined through our Odyssey Preg network. So Stanford, Columbia, Northeastern, UNC, Duke, Washington University, Northwestern, University of Colorado. We really purposely tried to get a geographic representation from across the US. In total, they include 35 different delivery hospitals. And I also would emphasize the reason we want to use EHR is because it has blood pressure information, which is really, really critical to research on hypertension and is not available in claims data. However, we also are using the claims data from MarketScan with OMOP CDM. And as Allison already mentioned, we built a study team with various discipline expertise.
Yep, and I think I'll close now and just say that for us, like getting this table in about, I think it was 3 to 4 weeks, was a really exciting step for us, because a lot of the premise of STARR OMOP as one of the members of the Odyssey network is that studies that we initiate here can be shared and executed at other study sites And so for us to be able to do this, and in specifically this understudied but very important area of medication safety in pregnancy was hugely exciting, and something that we're very motivated to continue doing work on as a team, both within Stanford and within our Odyssey network. And so if this sounds exciting to you, and if there are other questions that you have about how could we potentially use our pregnancy database here at Stanford and other sites for similar questions, please come and talk to me or Stephanie, and you can email us or talk to us here after this talk. Thank you.
I had a quick question, Allison. So if there is a user out there, they are working on a specific area, like you found Stephanie here, and then you had some background about OMOP. Like how would a new person actually go in and how do you penetrate OMOP or that community?
So I think a great way to get connected with the Odyssey community, honestly, is to join the weekly calls that are, I believe, on Tuesday mornings
at 8 a.m.
At 8 a.m.
and 4 p.m.
And so there are a lot of groups, and there are a lot of ways to get connected to the Odyssey community. They are a super friendly and collaborative bunch, as evidenced by the fact that we've gone from 2 to 30 members in our specific work group in just 3 months, and have already identified really exciting research collaborations that are happening, in addition to the people that you'll hear from next, like Keith and Nima, who are doing really related work as well. So I would say join the community call in teams as a way to sort of get connected to the Odyssey community. And then you can also see all of the work groups that are active that are similar to PREG. They have a public listing of all of those work groups and who leads them and when they meet, so that you could also join really subject-specific work groups, of which there are many. So that would be the 2 ways I would say in the Odyssey community. And also feel free to get in touch with me or Stephanie directly, and we can point you in some directions there that way also.
I would add, I had a lot of success just cold emailing people that I found had published or done bioarchives or presentations on Odyssey pregnancy research that were really responsive. And that's where we really recruited some people who have been really involved in our group so far.
I think that group is self-selecting in terms of being, self-selects friendly people who are willing to collaborate in general. And yeah, okay. Were there any hindrances, things that were hard? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying Nima was starting to talk.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm not. I just had my hand.
Okay.
So I don't know how to pronounce this. Preg. Great.
Like pregnancy. You got it.
So for PREG, can we pull OMOP data across various sites to build central models, or do we have to go through federated learning or other ideas where everybody's data ends up living with themselves?
Yeah, so the Odyssey community model is to conduct network studies by doing analyses at each individual site and pooling results that way. You've probably seen that as the mode of other Odyssey sites or studies, and that would be similar here. And that's thus far how we have been designing our studies. But that is also specifically because we are doing fairly standard, I would say, statistical analyses to look at associations between medications and outcomes, and are only now starting to dive into the potentially more machine learning focused approaches. We had a meeting with the patient level prediction group where they came and are interested in collaborating with sites on developing and evaluating models, but those also tend to use the approach of developing site-specific models and executing at site-specific, on site-specific data sets and pooling results that way. So that is the decision that the Odyssey community has made thus far. That said, we also know that there are ways to get IRB approval for pooling and accessing data within the Odyssey network, where some of the work that's already been done for you is that the data are at least in a standard format, and so you don't need to do that work. So that kind of relationship we know gets created all the time, and I think is also amenable to the Odyssey way.
Thank you.
I would only add in to Nima that we're trying to recruit some health systems that have multiple hospitals. I think Stanford, we're actually like the smallest site of the ones that we're including. You know, some of them have 7 to 10 hospitals, to at least have like a larger sample size at the site as well.
Does the UC system participate as one entity, or are they each separate?
I don't know.
Which
I
one?
have not seen the UCs participate in any network studies.
Yeah, we didn't have any luck reaching out to them. I think David Love might be talking.
Yeah, I think Dave, you're muted.
Yeah, it helps if I'm not muted. My apologies. Yeah, there were a couple of questions from Devanish in chat, and I'll just repeat them here. How many variables in total have you been extracting from the unstructured data, and what's the computation power cost that it takes to use such extractors for maybe 100 to 200 variable types?
Yeah, great question. So the initial set that we've started with were around 6, and that was operating over a combination of text and unstructured and flow sheet data. Those were the starting point in our group. And here at Stanford, there's been a lot of work to extract large numbers of variables from unstructured data and clinical text. And I think you'll hear about more of those topics later, actually, in today's sessions. And the computational cost, at least for the work that we did, was very low. You could run it on your laptop because the methods were honestly quite straightforward. If you do use more complex methods, like with some work I think that Jason Fries and co will talk about later, to use unsupervised learning methods, then you may potentially want to up your compute power, especially if you're operating over potentially millions of notes. But in the case where you can identify your relevant cohort and then apply your extractors to that specific cohort, your computational costs will be quite low.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear about this, the reach of the group you've put together. And it went to 30 members in 3 months, you said?
Yeah, thereabouts. We'll see if we can keep them. That's the work now, is to keep everyone interested and contributing. And that's a big part of the work that we try to do as leaders.
Wonderful. Look forward to seeing how it progresses.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, we've got, my apologies if I get this badly wrong, but Dr. Berzad Nadaralvajud. He's a postdoctoral research fellow, at the Stanford Biomedical Informatics Research. He's immersed in the fields of machine learning, deep learning, natural language understanding, and big data analytics. He's published several papers in the field of natural language understanding by working on word sense disambiguation, sentiment analysis, neural word embeddings, and deep learning models through national and international projects. So today, Berzad will be discussing Launcher. What can you tell us about Launcher?
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here speaking about Odyssey network studies and discussing the strategies for launching such studies at Stanford. And thank you for Alison and Stephanie. And so I think it would be better. And so I will discuss about how we can conduct the network studies. And so what's the structure of these studies and how we can run all of these studies on Stanford infrastructure. Okay. During my talk, I will be focusing on addressing the following 4 questions. How are Odyssey network studies structured? What is the impact of the network studies? And why do we need to engage in network studies or conduct a new one? And how is a network study run? And finally, how to run a network study on the secure Stanford workspaces on Nil and Karina. Let's get started with the first question. In general, all network studies get started with research questions, and then a study protocol is written to answer these questions by determining the study design, data requirements, and analysis methods. The R study packages are developed to implement all analysis methods. A call is made in the Odyssey community to find collaborators. Collaborators run the study package, and finally, the results are summarized and published. Today, I will be focusing on the study package and showing its structure and how we can run it. The study package looks like a standardized pipeline that can accept inputs from a variety of databases in any environment and produce results. But what's the content of this pipeline and how we can create this pipeline? The first component of this pipeline is database diagnostics. This module gives a profile of CDM databases to see if they are suitable to answer our research questions. And the output of this module actually is a general description of the database that we have in our study. The second part would be cohort generators and cohort diagnostics, which characterize the study cohorts individually. The last part is related to standardized analysis design, which may include incidence rate analysis, feature extraction, and cohort comparison, patient level prediction, or causal effect estimation. Finally, standardized documentation and metrics are used to report or analysis results. Here, the question is how to implement such a standardized analysis pipeline to automate the process and generate our results. In any network study, we will have a study package which implements a standardized pipeline consisting of multiple packages such as cohort package, characterization package, and prediction package. The basic approach to implement the study package is to use STARR packages. For example, to implement a prediction package, multiple STARR packages, as shown in this figure, are used in different layers. The second approach is strategies which recently proposed by the Odyssey community. In this approach, in the strategies, we only have one strategies package, which includes standardized input, standardized execution function, and standardized output. But what's the difference? What's the difference between this approach and the previous one? The difference is that you don't need to work directly with the basic underlying packages, and you only design the analysis pipeline by providing input JSON settings for your desired analysis. In this case, strategies completely handles the package dependency issues, and you don't care about which underlying packages are used or which one should be installed. So far, we saw implementation approach in network studies, but the other question is that why do we need to conduct or engage in any network study? In general, when we conduct research, we use a single database from a single institution and apply statistical methods to our data set to answer our research questions and get results. But the problem is how much the research process is reproducible on the other institutions' data. Unlike this conventional approach, as a result of network studies, we will be able to apply a standardized pipeline to a variety of data and variety of databases and multiple data, and evaluate how generalizable our conclusion is. And so we will be able to produce generalizable evidence and as a result of these studies. As talked earlier, the standardized pipeline will first provide transparency in model development and study analysis. It will evaluate the fairness and reliability of the results. And finally, it will validate the generalizability and transportability of the models. I would like to mention other aspects of the network studies by giving an example from my own research. Here you can see the Purpose Project. The Purpose Project is one of the Odyssey network studies that aims to predict patients at risk of post-operative prolonged opioid use. In this study, we evaluated all features used in the model development using chi-square metric and chose all significant features whose p-values are less than 0.01. Let's look at the results that achieved from 4 countries. In this Venn diagram, you can see all combination of common features between 4 CDM databases from the US, UK, Finland, and South Korea. We also extracted all CDM features only occurring in a single database and observed that the majority of significant features are related to a single database. For example, 5,400 significant features from STARR were not seen or maybe not significant in the other 3 countries. The question here is how all these 5,400 features impact all the study analysis developed on the STARR database, for example, the prediction models or propensity score model in causal effect estimation, and etc. As a result, many of analyses will be data dependent by the current feature sets. So how to understand this without running the study in other institutions? And so this shows how we can improve our research by conducting the network studies, and so reveal the different aspects of the research, and so how we can increase the generalizability of the models, the generalizability of results, and etc. Okay. Let's go over the third question of how a network study is run. The basic approach for running any study package developed by Hayes method libraries is to install the 4 main groups of applications. The first group includes R tools, which is required on Windows, and RStudio as IDE, and Java to run Odyssey R packages, as some components of R packages have been developed in Java. The second part is installing R Java, which is required to run Java modules in any R environment. And following that, we need to install underlying R packages used in the study package. And finally, we need to install the study package itself. The first 2 groups, R and Java, require operating system dependent installations. You can visit the Hayes webpage to see more details about these installations, but the last 2 groups are required to be installed in an R environment. For example, if you have a study package developing machine learning models, this package has used the Hayes PLP package, patient level prediction package. The PLP package itself uses other basic packages such as feature extraction and SQL render and database connector. When you install the PLP package, some dependencies may not be installed, and you may need to install them manually. Therefore, when you use the basic approach, you will need to machine with already installed Java. If you have Java, you will also need to install RJava, which requires a system-based installation with a root permission. And finally, you will need to manage the dependencies. All this is the difficulty we have with the basic approach to run any network study. As an alternative approach, as I mentioned earlier, the Odyssey community has recently developed a strategist module to develop and run network studies across all community. The strategy module is an R project that acts as a lightweight wrapper around one or more Hayes packages, and it provides some approach to better managing R dependencies. It provides functions for defining JSON-based module settings, also implements an execute function to run all analytical tasks. And finally, it exports the result as CSV files. If I want to compare both approaches, we have the same system-based installation for Java, RJava, and R in both methods. And however, in strategies, we don't need to install and manage the dependencies. Instead, we only need to install a strategy package and set up our setting files. Therefore, to run any network study developed using strategies, you will only need to download the project, configure local settings, execute the study, review CSV files, and finally share the results. It looks easy. Let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. The strategies encapsulate all analytical tasks into a single module and has an easy installation. Yeah, it's wonderful. But it's under development and may have some bugs for now. On the other hand, it may be difficult to use database connections with complicated authentication processes in encapsulated modules. You can check out the Odyssey SOC challenge to see more practical examples of strategies approach in conducting network studies. You can see, you can check out the Odyssey webpage and SOC challenge. It was very helpful, and you can learn lots about the structure of the network studies using strategies. Okay, so far we talked about the basic approach and strategies for running network studies. Finally, I would like to discuss how to run network studies on Stanford infrastructure on Nero and Carina. What Stanford provides for us, Stanford has an on-premise computing environment, Nero and Carina, for high-risk data. They both provide a Linux-based environment with already installed Java. That's okay. And so let's see how we can set up our environment now. The easiest way to run any network study on Nero and Carina is to manage our environment using Anaconda, as it's already been installed on Carina and Nero. The first step is to log into GCP account and download the JDBC driver for BigQuery in order to connect to the BigQuery using the R and, for example, Python, and set up your R environment using Conda. To create Conda environment, you need to initiate your environment with RBase and R Essential when creating it. And then you can easily install RJava using Conda into your environment and set the Java path in your system environment variable. So in this case, you don't need any system installation or root permission, and you can easily manage your own R environment and R and RJava. And finally, you can run R using your created environment and move forward with installing the required R packages as shown in this picture. That's all. And so feel free to contact me if you have any question regarding the network studies. And I would like also to thank Dr. Tina Hernandez-Bossart and our team in Bossart Lab, Priya Desai and her great team in Research IT, Black Adam from Odyssey, and Adis Walter and his team in SRCC. And at the end, if you want to learn more, please attend our Atlas and Reproducible Data Science workshop on May 16th. Thank you so much, and I will be happy to take your questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Behzad. If there are any questions from the crowd, nothing posted yet. I'll admit I was a bit distracted, or amazed and distracted by that colorful figure you had on what your slide 22. Just the visualization of what is local to a given institute versus what is available when you share. It's striking.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
No, slide 22, right?
22.
Is that the one with all the 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, even I have some questions about that.
Yeah.
This one? Yeah.
Can you help us understand? So the 5454, 871, those are things that are sort of specific to that institution, right? So
Yeah,
STARR
all these features occurred in the STARR OMOP, but we never, actually we cannot say, because we only select all the significant features. Maybe we have these features in the other databases, however, they are not significant, and or maybe these features may never occur in these databases, and we don't know this. However, if you, for example, in our research, we have used, we excluded all these, for example, single institution features, and by the combination, the other common features, we have created our own feature sets and develop our model based on this. And so in our research, we are going to answer this question: what's the impact of the common features in developing models? And so is that improve can improve, for example, the generalizability of the models or not?
So what are the common features? So for example, like the number 34, that's common between.
Here you can see this area is the common features between the UK and US. And so, however, this part is, we have the other Finland and Korea. And as you can see, here is a common area between the UK and US, excluding the Finland and the Korea. Here you can see the common features, 72 features are common between the Finland, UK, and Stanford, US. And here, 107 is the features that are common between the four databases. We have used different kinds of features from different domains, for example, the conditions, drugs, procedures, and measurements. And so after evaluating all these features, we wanted to see which of these features have occurred in different databases. And this figure actually shows any combination of the features through the 4 countries and 4 CDM databases.
I actually wanted to take a step back, Bazad, and can you help us understand, how did you decide that you wanted to do a network study? What made you want to decide that? And then once you did that, once you had created your plan, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience of going and reaching out to other communities to, get them to actually run your study?
Actually, in most of conventional studies, when we get the results and when we have conclusions, these conclusions cannot say all these conclusions are generalizable evidence. So they cannot be used, and we have a limitation in all of these studies. And so if you consider in many studies, in the limitation part, everyone say, for example, these are the single institution analysis, and we cannot expand the results and our conclusion to the other institutions. And so one of the objective of the network studies is 2 parts. At the same time, we can provide a transparency in the model development, and it will provide a reliability. At the same time, when we have the characterization, we will be able to characterize all the cohorts in different databases with each other. And so this will provide to evaluate the fairness of the analysis. And so at the same time, we can evaluate the generalizability. For example, if we only consider the US data and to develop our models, or maybe we use only the UK models, and we will be able to evaluate and validate the generalizability. However, in the second step, we would like to increase this generalizability. And for example, if it's possible to propose some universal models, for example, the last foundation models, and how we can use by combination of, at the same time, we cannot use the data, we cannot share the data. However, as Nima mentioned, the federated learning or other kind of federated analysis can be used in the pre-processing steps, in the development steps, and the post-process steps can be used to increase the generalizability and transportability of the models. And so this is actually the main role of the network studies. And so without the network studies, you will not be able to understand the position of your conclusion. And so how strengths in order to provide a concrete conclusion with more generalizability, and so we want to convert this conclusion to generalizable evidence, we need to at the same time validate on different databases, and also combine and leverage all of these databases to improve the final analysis result, to improve our models.
That makes sense.
All right. Well, thank you, Behzad, for a good talk, and Priya for your questions.
Thank you.
Okay, our next presenter is Dr. Keith Morse. Whoops. Keith is a pediatric hospitalist and the medical director of clinical informatics at Stanford Medicine. His academic roles including associate program director for Stanford's Clinical Informatics Fellowship. His work in operational and research informatics focuses on meaningful deployment of machine learning in clinical settings. He serves as Stanford's co-site PI for participation in PedsNet, which we've heard about earlier, an 11-site pediatric research consortium. It's on that topic, multi-site EHR research at Stanford with PedsNet, that Keith will be speaking to us today. Keith, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Before I dive into the specifics of PedsNet, I want to point out that without the immense support of research technology team, PedsNet would not be here at Stanford. Todd, Priya, Natasha, Hannah, they not only support our participation in this network in spirit, they have put hundreds of hours of effort to get this network stood up. And so I am the one talking, but this is definitely a team activity, and the credit should go to them as much as our team. All right. Ironically, Allison started her talk with an anecdote about the first STARR Summit, and I also have an anecdote from the first STARR Summit. This was a couple years ago. We had listened to the whole summit, and we were at the last talk of the day. I was listening to Andy Martin tell us about REDCap, and we had sort of finished the talk, and we were wrapping up last questions, and somebody raised his hand in the virtual setting and said, "This is all interesting, but I'm a nephrology fellow, and I have my research question, and I just need access to the data. How do I get access to the data?" And I feel for the guy, because getting access to EHR data is really confusing. Depending on where you live in the Stanford ecosystem, you have access to somewhere between 6 to 12 different points to get EHR data for research. The sort of best ways that I can think about summarizing these access points is along this sort of pain and value axis, where the pain is the amount of headache and suffering you're willing to go through to get it, things like approval, waiting, data incompleteness, ambiguity, technical expertise required. But then the value that you get is things like what types of utility does the data offer? What impact do the results that you get from that data? Can you answer nuanced questions? Do you get published in small journals or big journals? Do you get grants off of this data? So you could sort of imagine how there are sort of different points along these axes that researchers would find appropriate for their sort of goals and their pain tolerance. The reason that I bring this up is that I put PedsNet on this sort of upper right corner, and point this out, that the activation energy to sort of use this network is non-trivial. Typically, the timelines for PedsNet studies aren't well suited for trainees or other folks who are on 1 or 3 year sort of training programs. But if you are able to use PedsNet, it is a fabulous resource, not only to do impactful research, but also to link you to an active pediatric research community. And as we'll get into later, it's an effective mechanism for earning grant funding. So the goal today is that if you are looking for access to data and it seems like PedsNet would fit your research goals and your professional goals, please reach out. I would love to talk to more folks from the research community. So here's the agenda for what we're going to be talking about. So PedsNet is, as David mentioned, a research consortium of 11 academic pediatric hospitals. The network has been around since 2015 and is primarily supported by grant funding from PCORI. At a high level, its goals are to improve pediatric care through research and the enablement of a learning health system. The benefits of network participation are twofold. The first is the obvious one. You get access to a ton of data. So we share our data quarterly with the network. The data itself is in an OMOP adjacent format. So we start with OMOP, and then there are a handful of pediatric and network specific modifications that go through. The data is longitudinal back to 2009, and it contains all of the types of information that you would expect from a wide-reaching EHR database: demographics, vitals, diagnoses, procedures, medications, those types of things. The scale of the network is such that we have about 10% of the nation's children are seen at one of our PedsNet sites. CHOP is the founding institution for PedsNet, and they also continue to serve as the data coordinating center. So we send our data to CHOP for data harmonization, data quality reporting, and they're the ones who do the majority of the analysis. Although we are using an OMOP-like format, you'll see that this research configuration is different from the Odyssey type formats, where in this case, we are in fact sharing our data with other institutions. So we send copies of Stanford data to CHOP. It has benefits in terms of ability to monitor data quality, ability to change network confirmations for specific studies, but there's certainly some overhead costs at the beginning that we went through in order to get this set up. The second benefit of network participation here is streamlined administrative burden. When we joined the network, we signed what's called an umbrella IRB, which outlines a broad set of studies or characteristics of studies, all of which we consent to, and then other network participants also consent to. What this means for you as a researcher is that if your research question falls under this umbrella IRB, you don't have to get any other IRB approval. You get sort of 11 IRBs for the price of one. So it is immensely streamlined relative to other attempts to set up multi-institutional research. If your research question sort of exists outside that IRB or includes components that aren't covered in that umbrella IRB, either you have data elements that aren't part of the current network, or you have some sort of prospective data collection mechanism that would require separate IRBs, but for the vast majority of the studies, the paperwork is relatively streamlined. In terms of what types of studies PedsNet engages in, so there are 70+ projects that are either recently completed or ongoing, both from general pediatrics as well as subspecialty focused pediatrics. We have strong representation from nephrology and neurology communities. We've also done lots of work around long COVID. Here are a couple of recent examples. Also, we are participating in RECOVER, which is the $450 million NIH effort to study the effects of long COVID. In terms of funding to date, the network has received well over $90 million of extramural funding. You can see that the main funding sources are PCORI, NIH, and then other institutional support. Our success rate is 56% in grant applications. And I think this is a testament both to the rigor of the network and the sites that participate and the types of studies that it can enable. We have a process where folks who are interested in doing network studies, one of the first things that you do is if your study is approved, they do they call it a feasibility query, where you get a high-level summary of what types of results are available for your study in PedsNet. So you essentially get kind of a table 1 of your patient populations. You can then take that table and include it in your grant application. And we found that's a very effective way to argue for potential impact of the work that you are hoping to undertake. In terms of here at Stanford, we joined formally in 2021, and we have spent the last couple of years doing a lot of the legwork to get our site up to speed with the sort of network standards. Put a lot of work into updating our STARR OMOP into the PedsNet common data model, and we continue to adjust our data based on feedback from the data coordinating center. We are participating in a handful of grants: neurology, nephrology, rheumatology, infectious disease. We are led by Alan Schroeder, and then we also have Jessica Whalen, who handles all of the sticky components of our IRB, privacy, other components, and then Maria is our data scientist. I mentioned that we are heavily indebted to Research IT, and then we are also funded by MCHRI. We are proud to announce that we were recently, royal we here, Kate Steffen was awarded a funding from ARC to lead an implementation study around the adherence of transfusion guidelines, blood transfusion guidelines in the PICU. This is our first Stanford-led PedsNet study. We hope first of many, but this is something that is a milestone for us in terms of getting the infrastructure and word out, getting the infrastructure off the ground and word out to recruit investigators like Dr. Steffen to take advantage of PedsNet. Another method that we engage with PedsNet is as a participating site. So these are the types of studies where another institution is the primary grant winner, and then we participate as a data contributing site, and along with the data, we contribute clinical expertise and other components based on the specifics of the study. This is an example. PRESERVE is a PCORI-funded study led by Michelle Denberg out of CHOP. Mary is sort of walking the walk here, both in terms of she supports us through MCHRI and also supports us as the PI on this study. Broadly speaking, the study looks to expand the EHR capabilities of PedsNet to support nephrology-specific research. The analysis of that EHR data in terms of trends for normal blood pressure ranges, some comparative effectiveness work on managing blood pressure in pediatric populations. And then there's also a component for understanding the lived experiences of patients who suffer from chronic kidney disease. I bring up this component of lived experience because the EHR data doesn't say anything about lived experience. So we actually use PedsNet as a augmented recruitment tool for then a prospective component of the study. So PedsNet can be leveraged both for retrospective EHR studies as well as prospective studies that require additional data collection. In terms of who should get involved with PedsNet, I mentioned it's both painful and powerful. So generally we think about this is most appropriate for faculty here at Stanford, obviously interested in multi-site EHR data. The question of, do you have to have funding in order to use PedsNet? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, in the sense that this is not a free resource and we pay our data team or the data team at CHOP in order to execute studies. So funding is required. However, you don't have to have funding already lined up before you reach out to us. I mentioned earlier about the mechanism for feasibility queries. We are able to support grant applications to be able to take advantage of PedsNet. The other question we get a lot is, do you have to be an informatics researcher or a data scientist yourself in order to use PedsNet? The answer there is definitively no. We understand that this type of research is a team sport. We have folks who are very familiar with both the PedsNet administrative processes and PedsNet data structure and data science. And so we would like to pair you up with them. So there are a couple different ways to get involved with PedsNet. We have sort of seen examples of both. The first is as leading Stanford's participation in a study that somebody else is running. We typically get notifications that another site has received funding for a specific area, and then we will have to find somebody here at Stanford who could represent Stanford in that study. So if it is a neurosurgery study, we would need to find somebody who is either a neurosurgeon or interested in neurosurgery research who would represent Stanford as part of this study. So if you're interested in being part of PedsNet and want to be sort of in our queue of folks who are available to help to engage in these types of studies, we would love to hear from you. The other component is leading your own network study. Here's where you would design your own research question, secure your own funding, and then we would execute it through the network. I mentioned that we have Kate Steffen as our first example here. There's a third component, and that is through the PedsNet Scholars Program. And this is potentially folks who are not quite ready to take on their own studies. We have a program led through CHOP that takes scholars through a 2-year program of learning about different methods of comparative effectiveness research, pragmatic trial designs, and other methodology that leverage the PedsNet Scholars Program. Pierre Bennett is our most recent graduate of the program, and he has gone on to have good success with research and funding. Okay, so just to sort of reiterate from the beginning, if any of this sounds interesting, if it sounds like this could help your professional or research goals, please reach out. We'd love to chat.
Great.
That's it for me.
Thank you, Keith. Are there any questions from the other attendees? Well, if not, I just want to point out my own role tends to be on the operational side, kind of helping get things done. It's not about the science necessarily. And to me, it's just eye-opening how important the workflow, the process, the label here says it's a system, not the data. There is to actually getting research done. And that, what it was, it a 56% grant success rate? Right.
Yeah, it's amazing. I suspect the Odyssey, the folks who work with Odyssey also sort of echo this, but the value of having a community and particularly trust among that community goes a long way to sort of support these types of research. I think that's it's more than just a bunch of data and a bunch of legal agreements. It's people who believe in the work that they're doing and have faith that others are doing similar work.
Keith, can you talk a little bit about how the prospective studies recruitment happens?
Sure. So the prospective components, as I briefly mentioned, would be outside the umbrella IRB. So you'd have sort of arrangements for prospective components. They can take a couple different forms. So we are participating in one study, Preserve, that has a patient feedback component. We can also do chart reviews for certain types of things, either that aren't collected in the data model, or if we want to do some sort of validation of a computable phenotype, we have a chart review component. And so typically we would have patient identifiers that come from CHOP, get sent to us, and we execute some component of the protocol based on those identifiers.
So CHOP runs a cohort, identifies some patients that would fit the parameters of a study. They send us those those patient identifiers. We can then go back and identify those patients and then go and actually approach those patients for future.
Yeah, so we have a study with our rheumatology group that is follows essentially that methodology, where every week we send out, or every couple of weeks we send out a list of potential patients who would be appropriate for recruitment in this study, and they talk to them when they show up in clinic.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Okay, the final speaker in this first segment about Stanford participation in the larger consortium is Dr. Sophia Wang. She's an assistant professor in ophthalmology, specializing in the medical and surgical treatment of all different forms of glaucoma, as well as cataract surgery. Her research interests lie in big data for ophthalmology, and she's received multiple career development awards supporting her research, developing artificial intelligence algorithms to predict glaucoma patients' outcomes using natural language processing for electronic health records data. So today, Sophia will be discussing enabling bigger data in ophthalmology, standardizing eye data through the Odyssey Eye Care and Vision Research Working Group. I just read the title of your slide. Sophia, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks everyone for coming today. Today I'll bring it back to Odyssey for the end of this particular session. And I'll talk about my experiences working with the Odyssey Eye Care and Vision Research Working Group, which I think is the ophthalmology kind of equivalent of PREG that we heard about earlier. I'll talk about some of the motivating factors for the working group, and including an overview of different ophthalmic data types. And I'll talk about our work mapping ophthalmology data to the OMOP common data model and some of the exciting opportunities we've gained for participating in ophthalmology network studies. So for the past decades, there's been a huge rise, like in ophthalmology specifically, of the use of larger and large data sets, big data, if you will. And it really started off with insurance claims data sets, collecting, containing demographics and ICD codes and meds and labs, et cetera, usually all in their own proprietary format. And then there's also been increasing interest in using EHR for ophthalmology, mostly individual EHR, institutional EHR, but more recently we've had more established multi-institutional registries of EHR So that includes IRIS registry, which is like the biggest specialty registry out there ever, and it contains like over 70% of ophthalmology kind of patients in the US essentially. And then SOURCE registry, which is more academic centers. But again, most of these are in their own non-standard format for each of their registries. And then of course, at the same time, several organizations have created these large data sets that are mapping to an actually common standard data model, the OMOP data model. So that includes institutions individually, like our own STARR OMOP that Priya has been working so hard on, but also sort of big national data sets like the NIH All of Us cohort is in this OMOP de-identified sort of common data model and many COVID networks. But the problem is that most of the ophthalmology relevant data that we care about in our specialty is missing from these large data sets. And so that's a huge problem for us because we would like to be able to leverage sort of multi-institutional large data sets to do ophthalmology studies. And much of it is missing, we think, because there's lack of standardization for ophthalmology data, and there's a lot of free text fields in ophthalmology. So we would like to be able to bring ophthalmology into the OMOP fold. What ophthalmology data, you might ask? So visual acuity is the #1 most important thing that is usually missing. So here's a screenshot of our EPIC EHR front end. You can see some of the eye exam elements that we put in for the patients, including the all-important visual acuity, which is the letters that you read off the eye chart when you go to the eye doctor. But we also have intraocular pressure and the pupils. All of those are very important. In fact, we call them the vital signs for the eye. They're as important to the eye as blood pressure and heart rate are for cardiology, temperature for infectious diseases, and just generally your health. So these are very important for us. And then, you know, for beyond the basic eye vital signs, there's actually a whole slew of eye exam findings that we can obtain from the slit lamp exam, which is a little cartoon on the left. That's what happens when you go to the eye doctor and you sit in one of those machines and they shine the light at your eye and they're looking at all the different parts of your eye. And this is just exactly analogous to when you go to your regular doctor and they put the stethoscope on you and listen to your heart and lungs, right? There's all these like sort of standard sections of the physical exam and different findings that can be measured there. So all this data is, for ophthalmology is generally missing and ignored, and that was a really missed opportunity for our entire field. So just about 1 year ago, the Odyssey Eye Care Vision and Vision Working Group was kicked off, or maybe I should say revitalized from its very long dormant stage by several excellent folks. We have Sally Baxter, Michelle Reiber, and Carrie Getz, and they're out of UCSD and the NIH National Eye Institute representation. And there's been like a huge support and encouragement from the National Eye Institute at the NIH to facilitate standardization of ophthalmology data. So we now meet monthly to talk about ophthalmology data standardization. I think our member roster is up to like 87 as of the last count, but not everyone comes to every meeting because there aren't many clinicians in the group. So probably attendance is closer to like 30 or 40 at any given meeting. And then off of this, various subgroups have been spawned covering different specialties. For example, there's a glaucoma one that's working on a computable definition of glaucoma. There's a retina group that's working on diabetic retinopathy phenotyping and making sure all the different retina terminologies are covered. And another visual acuity group just solely looking at visual acuity and impairment and trying to standardize that. So from just a few folks, this group has really grown into kind of a very robust number of participants. And for me, like one of the advantages of joining this community is I've gotten to meet and work with a ton of people through this group. It's become kind of the place to be, the who's who of young informaticists in ophthalmology and some senior informaticists too. So if anyone out there is interested in joining their particular subspecialty Odyssey group, I would certainly highly recommend that. So one of the first things the Vision Care Working Group started on was doing a gap analysis for the OMOP standard concepts. So it's trying to figure out how good the coverage is in OMOP vocabulary for our eye exam components. So basically, the work started with mapping all the EPIC's eye exam smart data elements, all the little boxes that we saw from the front end, to their OMOP common data model equivalent. And there's parallel work that's also happening with the STARR EHR. And so basically we looked at all those elements and find the best OMOP standard concept to go with it, and then tried to determine whether that's actually a good enough match, like an exact equal match, or if it's not quite a match, say the OMOP concept subsumes the EPIC element, something's missing, laterality is missing, or some other concept, or if OMOP was more specific, or if there was just no matching concept at all. So we had about a quarter perfectly matching concepts, and then of the ones that weren't perfectly matching, we have a lot of missing laterality, right eye versus left eye, which is really important also for ophthalmology outcomes. And some of the stuff that's not matched, there's not representation in OMOP, are like kind of free text comment fields for comments on how the exam was done. So why is so much of that information missing? So I'll just walk you through an example of visual acuity. Like, you'd think with visual acuity being the most standard sort of vital sign that this would be well covered in standard OMOP terminologies, but it turns out a lot of the concepts are not perfectly aligned. So the way we measure visual acuity, you can measure it near, you can measure it at a distance, you can use different eye charts like tumbling E's or letters. You've got the with glasses or without glasses. If you're up the optom getting measured for glasses, they'll do the refraction and update your prescription, and that's your refracted vision. If you're not getting glasses, they'll check you with a pinhole. You look through the little pinhole, it's kind of like squinting, your vision gets better. So there's with or without pinhole, right? And so there's like, if you look at all the possible combinations, the way you can like test visual acuity, there's a lot of them. And it's this huge tree. But of course, not every combination of test conditions is common. And then some of those combinations are not well represented in OMOP. And we're like very picky about like what circumstances the visual acuity is represented in, because you can imagine your vision without glasses is going to be really different than your vision with glasses. For anyone who wears glasses, you would know that. So lest you think that we are somehow special in ophthalmology, I will remind folks that actually blood pressure is really complicated too. Manual, automated, sitting, supine, on your arm, on your leg, ambulatory, at home, etc. So like I don't know if these distinctions are as important to cardiologists as the visual acuity distinctions are for us, but for us, the standard way, the way we measure visual acuity, it's always mentioned in our notes. So anyways, I've been really interested in getting the visual acuity and intraocular pressure data into our STARR OMOP, almost since the moment that I heard from Priya about STARR OMOP and attended all the initial user tutorials, like, oh, I really want ophthalmology data in there. But time wasn't ripe for that yet, but thanks to the work in the Odyssey group, there is now quite a large critical mass of other institutions who are interested in doing the same thing and interested in working together to actually get it done. So that means practically mapping these EPIC specific smart data elements to the STARR OMOP observation table. And then we want to do it the same way as everybody else and being able to update the mappings together with everyone else as we work together to also update the OMOP concepts, which is a process that we know will take years, but we don't want to wait years to at least get some of the visual acuity data into the OMOP common data model as it is. And so since everyone else is doing it too, we can hopefully then be able to run network studies with actually meaningful ophthalmic clinical outcomes, including visual acuity, intraocular pressure, and all those things. So speaking of network studies, I'll sort of end by mentioning one that, thanks to the working group, has been launched and we are participating in at Stanford. And Bazad mentioned this earlier as well. And this study was proposed by Cindy Tai, an ophthalmologist at Johns Hopkins, and she wanted to study the effects of anti-VEGF injections in the eye on the kidney. And this class of medications is commonly used in the treatment of cancer, but we give these medications direct to the eyeball in our eye clinic for macular degeneration or diabetic retinopathy. And she wanted to know whether these injections affect kidney failure because there are known kidney complications when the drugs are given systemically. And so this study does not need any of the ophthalmic data elements because we're not studying visual acuity or intraocular pressure. So we can actually run it now. And it's one of the 4 large current network studies that are being run on OMOP data around the world right now as part of their sort of SOS project. So it's super exciting, and it's really great to be able to be a part of this. Speaking of someone who doesn't really have any background in running network studies, like being able to participate and learn from this process has been really great. And again, another plug for joining your specialty OMOP working group. So that's sort of the end of our presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sophia. Are there any questions from the audience? I guess not. I mean, as someone personally with longstanding vision issues, I guess I didn't appreciate just how complex and, as you said, how underrepresented this seems to be in some of the common things. Are there any changes to the data model in the works from what you're putting forth?
Yeah, there are. And as you know, the OMOP relies heavily on other terminologies that it sort of ingests, like SNOMED, for example. So there's actually a whole another group of people working on updating SNOMED, and so eventually that will like trickle up to OMOP. It's like kind of the same group of people that are in the Odyssey working group are also in the SNOMED update group for ophthalmology. So there is that effort going on.
But it sounds like that's probably years in the making, not something soon, right?
Right. Well, you know, the pessimist in me probably agrees with you, but the optimist in me hopes it won't be too many years. And that's why we kind of want to go ahead with at least getting some of the visual acuity data into our respective OMOP systems so that we can, you know, at least sort of start to do some of the research, even if the current terminology isn't totally perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. If there's no other questions, I think.
Can I ask? I have one quick question for you, Sophia. I've been watching the SOS Odyssey calls, and I'm curious what it's been like to be, you know, the featured project and how your involvement's been in that and your experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people involved, and I will certainly say that I'm not like technically executing the study here because there's a lot of people helping us do that. But I think it's been great to kind of be spotlighted and have our project be one of the sort of examples that is being highlighted and sort of run through. We have like an SOS like subgroup on the Teams environment for Odyssey where people who are interested in contributing are just like kind of like chatting. So there have been a lot of questions about like, oh, you know, what kind of kidney failure we want to define, and like, you know, whether we care about total failure or like impairment basically, and then different kind of like ways of looking at the different eye intravitreal injections. So it's been nice to kind of just be communicating and corresponding with the community on kind of how we execute the study. So yeah, it's been great. I've learned a lot.
Great. Two new or at least resurrected work groups in the Odyssey Consortium. Wonderful. Sophia, thank you so much for your talk and for your time.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.